Coming up on today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast, I ran into another dilemma as I was part of another mock draft. This time it was for ESPN for Fitz and Harry, and I ran into a dilemma, had a few options on the table. I'll tell you what those options were and what the dilemma was, and ultimately what I ended up doing. We'll talk about that. Of course, you'll get news and notes of the day and calls and texts. We'll close out the show, all coming up on Wednesday's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast, April 19th, 2023.
Just win. Just win. Just win. Just win.
The autumn wind is a raider, pillaging just for fun. He'll knock you round and upside down and laugh when he's conquered and won. And won. And won. And won. And won.
Welcome in, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen of the day. Make sure you subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast to get the latest edition of the show as soon as it's available. If you are checking us out on YouTube, that's because of my guy Ari. So not only do we appreciate you, but we appreciate him. You can find him on Twitter at Ari Produces. Again, he takes a lot of pride in knowing that we're up each and every day. We're looking good. We're sounding good. We're doing what we're supposed to do. So big ups to my guy Ari, who does a great job each and every day. Coming up on the show, like I said, got a lot to get to. Can't wait to tell you about the dilemma that I ran into when it came to the latest mock draft that I was a part of with ESPN nationally. Fitz and Harry, that's Jason Fitz and Harry Douglas. They do the midday show there on ESPN following Greeny. And I just thought it was really cool that, they asked me to be a part of it. And two, all of a sudden I got hit with a big-time dilemma. But we'll talk about that coming up in segment number 2 of the show. Here in segment number 1, let's go ahead and do news and notes. And off top, found out that GM Dave Ziegler is actually going to meet with the media on Friday at the Intermountain Healthcare Performance Center. That's going to happen at noon Pacific time, so you can look forward to that. That'll be the last time that he talks to the media before the actual draft gets started in Kansas City next week. And it's something that all of the GMs across the league do, but didn't know exactly when the Raiders were going to hold theirs, so found out it's going to be Friday at noon, so look forward to that. That's something that, of course, I'll bring the sounds to it on Monday's show here on the Locked On Raiders podcast. Of course, it's going to be streamed on Raiders.com on their YouTube page, so you can check that out as well, but it'll be good to hear from Dave Ziegler. The last time I got to talk to him was in Phoenix, Arizona at the owners meeting, so that's coming up Friday at noon. Also, later on this morning, depending on what time you're listening to this podcast, matter of fact, it's probably over by now, 7 a.m. Pacific time, Todd McShay from ESPN, he's going to have his second pre-draft conference call. Of course, Mel Kiper had his second one. Todd McShay had one a little bit earlier in this offseason, and now it's his time to have his second one, so I'll be on that call. I'll just let you know him and Mel came together on a three-round mock draft, so I want you to know who they picked for the Raiders in the first 3 rounds of their latest mock drafts. Mel Kiper went in round 1, pick number 7, Devin Witherspoon, cornerback Illinois. He said, I thought hard about Kentucky quarterback Will Levis, but the reality is the Raiders believe they have the roster to compete in the AFC West this season. That's why they signed Jimmy G. If they want a defender to help them in 2023, it's Witherspoon who can immediately become their top guy. And just a little side note, Kiper made this pick with Christian Gonzalez on the board. McShay had the Falcons taking Gonzalez with the very next pick. So moving on to round 2, pick number 38, it was Todd McShay's opportunity. He picked Steve Avila, the center and guard from TCU. And he says, Mel took care of the cornerback need in the first round, so I'm moving on to the offensive line in the second. The Raiders invested in Jimmy G and the franchise-tagged running back Josh Jacobs, so why not give them both help on the interior line? Avila could end up being a really good run blocker in the pros. Note, the Raiders address a huge need right where they need to address it. Avila is just the 3rd interior offensive lineman taken in the draft, and Kiper swiped Tennessee's Hendon Hooker with this pick just before this one goes to the Seahawks. So no quarterback for the Raiders with either of their first 2 picks. So Steve Avila, center guard from TCU, is what Todd McShay has for the Raiders in round 2 at pick 38, and Mel Kiper has Devin Witherspoon, cornerback out of Illinois, with pick number 7 in round 1. And in round 3, Todd McShay doubles down. Pick Tucker Kraft, tight end out of South Dakota State, said the Raiders traded away Darren Waller. New quarterback Jimmy G ranked 2nd in the NFL in yards per attempt on passes to tight ends last season, 9.5. Kraft would be a red zone favorite for Garoppolo in Las Vegas. Little side note, another big need position for the Raiders after the trade of Darren Waller and the exit of Foster Moreau. Kraft is the 7th tight end taken in this mock draft. Remember, that's at round 3, pick number 70, and 7 tight ends are already off the board, which lets you know how deep the class is when it comes to tight end. Then finally, with the second round 3 pick, number 100 overall, Todd McShay picked Tavius Robinson, outside linebacker from Ole Miss, said Chandler Jones is 33 years old. He didn't live up to expectations his first season in Vegas, so getting more explosive pass rushers with versatility wouldn't be a bad call for the Raiders. Note, the Raiders could probably get by with Max Crosby and Chandler Jones, but depth is a need at this point in the draft. You're looking more at best player available than specific needs anyway. So there you go. Those are the 4 picks out of the first 3 rounds from Mel Kiper Jr. and Todd McShay from ESPN. Of course, Kiper went Devin Witherspoon, cornerback out of Illinois. I think everyone knows how I feel about him. He's a guy that is obviously in a position of need. A lot of people want to disagree and say, hey, no corner that early, go with the defensive line, and that's fine. Again, all I've been saying is get the best defensive player you can get if you're there at 7. So Devin Witherspoon goes number 1, or goes number 7 in round 1. And then in round 2, pick number 38, Todd McShay goes with a center or a guard, Steve Avila. And the thing about it is Dave Ziegler loves versatility. So I could see a guy that could play both center and guard being something that, Dave Ziegler would it appeal to him. So I could see them making that move. I do think the offensive line is going to get addressed at some point in the draft. Just don't know if it's going to happen as early as round 2. And then we all know tight end is a must. As he mentioned, talked about Darren Waller being traded to New York and Foster Moreau. Hopefully he gets better, and obviously he's dealing with a lot more than just not having a team right now, as he's dealing with Hodgkin's lymphoma, and of course all prayers are with the Moreau family. Foster, really good dude. It was great to get to know him over the few years that he was with the Silver and Black, and like I said, all prayers to him. But the facts are that Jimmy G does like to throw to the tight end position. So the Raiders do need to address that, and it looks like Todd McShay has them addressing it with pick number 70 in round 3 with Tucker Kraft out of South Dakota State. And I think one thing that he said that was real big was the fact that he'd be a big red zone target for the Silver and Black. And we all know the Raiders need to address their red zone offense because it's just not up to par. And then finally, with the last pick in round 3, pick number 100 overall, Tavius Robinson, outside linebacker, Ole Miss, basically to slide in there and fill that void for Chandler Jones because he is getting older. He's going to be with the Silver and Black in 2023, but he probably needs to be in a limited capacity, right? He needs to be a guy that should be spelled, and so maybe Robinson could bring some juice. But there you go, a couple defenders with the first 4 picks, 2 guys on defense, 2 guys on the offensive side of the ball, according to Mel Kiper and Todd McShay. Of course, Todd McShay rolling with 3 picks and Mel with 1. And Todd McShay is the guy that I'll be talking to this morning, 7 a.m. Again, depending on what time you're listening to this, he might already have had the conference call, and I'll bring some of the highlights from that to the show coming up tomorrow. Also, wanted to think about and talk about Tyree Wilson, the edge from Texas Tech. Side note, I'll have his head coach, Joey McGuire, on my radio show this afternoon at 3:30. I'm very excited about that, just to kind of give the ins and out on Tyree Wilson. But this note on Tyree, several NFL scouts and coaches believe Tyree Wilson would be a better overall pro than Will Anderson. Multiple scouts reportedly wouldn't be surprised if Wilson went ahead of Anderson at the draft. Wilson racked up 17 total sacks across 4 seasons in college, while Anderson racked up 34.5 total sacks across 3 seasons. Wilson has met privately with the Cardinals, Bears, Texans, Jaguars, Raiders, and Patriots so far. And as I said, head coach Joey McGuire will be a guest on my radio show later on today around 3:30 Pacific time, talking all things Tyree Wilson. And it's funny, in the mock draft that we're going to talk about coming up in segment number 2, Tyree Wilson did go higher than Will Anderson, and that really kind of put a monkey wrench in the whole little mock draft and put me in a weird position when I got on the board at number 7. Again, I'll explain that coming up in segment number 2, but interesting stuff, man. Tyree Wilson is not established, and he's not as productive so far as Will Anderson, but he's also a guy that a lot of people look at and say, yeah, but he's just getting better. You kind of know who Will Anderson's going to be. So as much as I like Will Anderson, I think Tyree Wilson would be a great pick as well if the Raiders had the opportunity to go get him at number 7. Now, in multiple mock drafts that I've been a part of, he wasn't available, so I couldn't make that selection, so I didn't. But I'll explain to you coming up in segment number 2 what I did for Jason Fitz and Harry Douglas on ESPN when it came to their mock draft that they're doing on the show. And finally, last little nugget I have here for segment number 1 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast, kind of news and notes of the day, is about a trade that happened with a veteran wide receiver. Allen Robinson gets traded from the Rams to the Steelers. The Steelers get Allen Robinson and a 7th round pick, number 251 overall. The Rams receive the 7th round pick, number 234. Rams will pay $10.25 million of Robinson's salary. Steelers pay the remaining $5 million. Robinson is scheduled to be in Pittsburgh for a physical on Wednesday, and as long as the physical's good, that deal will go through. So the Rams are completely dismantling their roster. I wouldn't be surprised if they make some more moves before or on the draft day, but they've got a Lombardi, so it feels like that they've got themselves a few years to at least be able to try to turn that thing around. But all those draft picks that they gave up to go get that team and put it together, all the money that they spent, it paid off in a major way, no doubt, by getting the Lombardi. But now they're paying the price, and they're gotta kind of rebuild or, almost press reset on everything, trying to get their team where they need to go. But again, they've got a Lombardi. It feels pretty good if if that's what they got to go ahead and go through the process that they're going through right now. But Allen Robinson is on the move. Didn't do a whole lot while he was with the Rams. Now the Pittsburgh Steelers make the decision to get Kenny Pickett, a very reliable weapon. So the Steelers are trying to put their roster together a week before the draft, as free agency has been going on, and of course the draft is coming up next week. So that's all I got for you for segment number 1 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Little news and notes of the day. Coming up in segment number 2, we're going to talk all things about the mock draft that I'm a part of on ESPN with Fitz and Harry. That's Jason Fitz and Harry Douglas. Really good stuff. I'll tell you about the dilemma I ran into and what my ultimate solution was. We'll do it coming up after I tell you about FanDuel. And I don't know how much you're paying attention to baseball, but grand slams, no-hitters, double plays, they're all back. There's no better place to get in on the Major League Baseball action than FanDuel. It's America's #1 sports book. Right now, new customers can step up to the plate with a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon, sign up, place your first bet, and get up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if you don't win. Don't miss your chance to get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. FanDuel, the official partner of Major League Baseball. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Got to get into this mock draft that I was asked to be a part of for ESPN National. Anyone who's been listening to me for a while knows that I've been doing a lot of radio with ESPN National. It's been such a pleasure and honor to be able to be a part of the big monster that is ESPN. And Jason Fitz and Harry Douglas have a really good show called Fitz and Harry. And so they're doing their mock draft like I'm doing a mock draft on my radio show, Unnecessary Roughness, on Raider Nation Radio 920, just like we did one on the Locked On podcast network that actually gets started tomorrow. You'll start to hear how that rolls out. Like everybody's putting out a mock draft right now, but it was, like I said, an honor just to be asked to be a part of it. So I got hit up by the producer and he said, hey, this is what we want you to do. There is no trades in our mock draft. You just have to pick the best player available or whoever you think the Raiders would pick at number 7. And of course, we'll give you the details on what the other people have selected ahead of you. So I said, okay, no doubt. No problem. Thought it was going to go pretty status quo, quarterback, defensive player, potential quarterback, defensive player. You know what I mean? Like, I just kind of figured it was going to go just like a lot of the mock drafts have been going, basically what we've been talking about here on the show a lot. And even in segment number 1, I kind of got it mixed up. Now that I'm looking at who's been selected, I actually got the order messed up. But let me go ahead and break it down to you right now, and then I'll tell you what my dilemma was when they got to number 7. So the Carolina Panthers selected Bryce Young. No doubt about it. That's a no-brainer. But Houston threw a monkey wrench into the whole plan. They went Will Anderson at number 2, and that's actually something that's been rumored quite a bit. I've talked about it quite a bit on the show that, they're not 100% sold on C.J. Stroud. They're also not 100% sold on C.J. Stroud's agent, and I do know that is actually a little bit of a factor. I talked to a guy from Houston. He said he doesn't think it should be a big factor, but he does believe it has a little bit to something to do with it. So Will Anderson at number 2 was selected for Houston. At 3, this is where the Tyree Wilson thing came in. Arizona selected Tyree Wilson at number 3. So there you go. A guy that potentially could have been there at number 7. The edge out of Texas Tech went number 3 overall to the Arizona Cardinals. That gave the Indianapolis Colts their opportunity to get their quarterback. Would they get Anthony Richardson or C.J. Stroud? They went C.J. Stroud out of Ohio State. Seattle at number 5. Who are they going to go with? Jalen Carter, defensive tackle out of Georgia. So right now, Bryce Young, Will Anderson, Tyree Wilson, C.J. Stroud is off the board. Do you see how my dilemma's starting to build up? Number 6, Detroit. What were they going to do? Remember, they just got rid of Jeffrey Okudah. They traded him to the Atlanta Falcons. Well, they went with Devin Witherspoon, the defensive back out of Illinois. So that was DB number 1 for me. I like Christian Gonzalez a lot as well, the DB out of Oregon. But Witherspoon is DB 1 for me. So then all of a sudden, I'm on the clock. It's like, wait, hold on. Witherspoon's gone. Christian Gonzalez is there. Will Levis is there. But Anthony Richardson is there as well. So now you got a potential franchise quarterback. You got a DB that can immediately help out your defense. And then you got Will Levis that could potentially be your franchise quarterback that has been talked about quite a bit from a lot of different people. Not me. I'm not a big fan of Will Levis, so I'm sure you can pretty much figure that I wasn't going to select him. But I was in such a weird position with this. I even talked about it on my radio show. Like, man, what do I do? Right? Raider Nation, what would you do? And so I had people calling in and texting in and saying what I should do. Had one guy say, if you pick Will Levis, I'm going to give you that Cleve Farrell selection look and go bury my head in the sand. So don't do that. I didn't. So Will Levis wasn't the option, but it came down to Anthony Richardson and Christian Gonzalez for me. And again, I've talked about it multiple times on the podcast. This is reality, right? I mean, just because we think that we know, and all the experts, so-called experts like Todd McShay, who I'm talking to later on this morning, they give you their idea of what they think is going to happen. We just don't know what flavor these teams are feeling until they actually make the selection, right? Bryce Young, CJ Stroud for the longest were the two guys that were going to go 1-2, and it didn't necessarily have to be in that order. I thought CJ Stroud was going to go 1 and then Bryce Young. Well, now that Bryce Young has canceled all his meetings with everyone else, I mean, it's like a foregone conclusion that they're going to go with Bryce Young, Carolina, even though the GM says that they haven't told him that yet. I'll believe that when I see it. I don't believe that, but I just knew that Houston would go with a quarterback. And look, they still might, but in this, for the sake of this argument, they didn't. They went with Will Anderson. Tyree Wilson jumped up to that number 3 spot. Stroud at 4. Like, if you had told me Stroud would be available at 4, I would have told you you're crazy if you had said that months ago, right? I just didn't think that there was any chance that can happen. Jalen Carter, Seattle, 5. Okay, that makes sense. Witherspoon, Detroit. That makes sense, right? I mean, I thought about that as soon as they traded away Jeffrey Okudah. I thought, okay, well, Gonzalez and Witherspoon might go there, but I also know that they addressed the cornerback position quite a bit in free agency as well. So I thought, well, maybe not. Maybe they'll end up going with someone else. Maybe they'll go with the quarterback to sit behind Jared Goff and learn a little bit. But they went with Witherspoon. So Richardson or Gonzalez? I kept thinking, what do I do? Do I, go and get the guy that's going to be great right now, or do I go and get a quarterback that has the potential to be great but hasn't had a lot of experience in college? So ultimately, not to drag this out any longer, I went with Anthony Richardson. I really did, and this was my my argument. Matter of fact, here's actually my what I turned in for ESPN that'll play on Fitz and Harry, depending on what time you're listening to this. It could be playing right now. This is actually my explanation of what I had to say on Fitz and Harry about the number 7 overall pick. With the 7th pick in the 2023 Fitz and Harry mock draft, the Las Vegas Raiders select Anthony Richardson, quarterback, Florida. And this was not an easy decision, fellas. This was one of those decisions that I went back and forth on quite a bit between Anthony Richardson and the cornerback out of Oregon, Christian Gonzalez. The Raiders really need a lot of defensive help, and so I really was leaning that direction. But since the quarterback fell to them, they didn't have to trade up to go get their guy. I felt like it was a no-brainer to go ahead and take Anthony Richardson. He's got a ton of upside. He's a young guy at only 20 years old. He's got a work ethic after doing a lot of research and talking to a lot of different people. He's got a work ethic that is sick, great intelligence. He's got it between the ears. So I think that Josh McDaniels would love to have the opportunity to groom his quarterback of the future, of the long future. And they still have 11 draft picks in a draft that is very deep in corners, very deep in defensive players in general. They can address that defense that needs a lot of work starting as early as the 2nd round, or maybe even trading up to the back end of the 1st round. So Anthony Richardson, quarterback out of Florida, is the pick for the Silver and Black at number 7 in the Fitz and Harry 2023 mock draft. So there you go. There was my selection. There was the reasoning for my selection. And again, it was one of those that I went back and forth with lots of times. But since I didn't have to trade up for the quarterback, I thought it made sense. Right, especially because the Raiders have 12 total picks as of right now. So if I didn't have to trade up and waste any draft capital, okay, I swung for the fences for the quarterback. But the draft class is deep when it comes to corners. I'm a big Emmanuel Forbes guy, so maybe the Raiders trade up for him at the back end of round 1, or maybe he falls to round 2. You never know how this thing is going to shake out. So in my mind, that's what I was thinking. I do realize that they still need edge help. I know that they need defensive tackle help. I get it. Linebacker help and all that. But with 11 more picks, and now you don't have to worry about your quarterback of the future, you feel like you have an opportunity to let him groom, then I'm good with that. Now, the one thing is funny. The one thing that was said by the producer from Fitz and Harry, he said, just hope that he works out better than the last Florida quarterback that Josh McDaniels drafted. And I thought, oh, why did you say that? There's no reason to say that. Why did you even bring that into my mind and remind me of that? So that was some bad juju that Evan put on me from ESPN. But besides that, I felt pretty confident, and I felt like my reasoning for going with Anthony Richardson made a whole lot of sense. And look, the bottom line, Raider Nation, it could end up looking like that on the 27th. It could come down to Anthony Richardson, Christian Gonzalez, or other at number 7. And Dave Ziegler, Champ Kelly, Patrick Graham, Josh McDaniels, not necessarily in that order, but all these guys are going to have to make that decision. What makes more sense at that spot? A potential quarterback of the future or an immediate upgrade on the defense? And Christian Gonzalez would definitely be that. And maybe some other person. Maybe they're talking about Nolan Smith out of Georgia, or maybe they're even talking about an offensive lineman, a Skoronski, or, a Broderick Jones or a Paris Johnson Jr. Maybe they're looking at an offensive lineman, someone who could be a right tackle of the future. Who knows? But they're going to have a player on the board or multiple players on the board to choose from where they're going to have a tough decision to make as far as I'm concerned. But it's a lot of fun being part of these mock drafts, especially the ones that you can't trade out of and you got to make a decision. So the decision I rolled with was Anthony Richardson, quarterback out of Florida. Coming up, segment number 3, what's your call? What's on your mind? Your calls and texts are coming up next, 707-654-4693. This is the Locked On Raiders podcast. Here we go, Raider Nation, segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Your calls and texts straight off that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. Let's start out with a call from Nick in the OC. He's calling to talk about Anthony Richardson and his piece on the Players Tribune, and then throws a trade idea out there. Here he is, Nick in the OC.
Hey, Q, Nick from OC, man. Hey, just a couple things here. Number one, I really appreciate your feedback and your just review on Richardson and his letter. I heard it from another sportscast show with two guys just talking about it, and they were kind of bashing it, actually, and they said this could not do him any good, blah, 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 all this stuff, and just kind of knocking it, and they didn't make fun of it, but it was very negative. And then a few days later, I listened to your show, your podcast, and I really appreciate the heartfelt message and the actual reality of it. So I totally respect you and your perspective, man. It's very rare to have people as grounded as you, so I really appreciate that. And then number two, this is just kind of a question for you. Do you think it's possible if the Raiders made a trade with a team that's like a perennial loser, like the cellar dwellers? I don't know. I'm making this up. Maybe Indianapolis, Chicago, or somebody, and you forecast whoever will be like in the bottom 3 to 5 teams next year, and try to get their number one pick for next year? Is that, kind of thinking ahead for the Caleb Williams or any other of those top quarterbacks that's going to be around, since it's a better quarterback year next year? But anyways, just thought I'd run that by you. What do you think, man? Anyways, have a good one. Take care. Go Raiders.
Nick, thanks for the call. Appreciate you. And yeah, whoever was talking about Anthony Richardson's piece in the Players Tribune, I don't know why they'd be dogging him about that. That's crazy. To me, it feels like just some people that can't relate, right? Some guys that have never been in a position where someone has doubted them or told them that they couldn't do something. I don't know who that would be, right? But that's just what that seems like to me. I don't know. For me, I like to read pieces like that, and I feel like I can relate to Anthony Richardson. Obviously not in the same way. I'm not a football player. I'm not a basketball player. I've never been a professional athlete. But, from a standpoint of people doubt you or people think that you can't do something or people look at you like, oh, you'll never do this, do that, the other, and then you go and prove them wrong. And again, with that strong work ethic, that just really made me think that this dude, right, whatever he doesn't have right now, he could figure out a way to have. And I know accuracy is tough to teach. I'm not really a firm believer in that you can teach accuracy, but if there's one guy that can figure it out, I know Jalen Hurts worked his tail off to become the most accurate quarterback that he could be. So if Jalen could do it, I don't see why Anthony Richardson can't do it. So I'm with it, right? I'm with it. And I thought that piece on the Players Tribune was fantastic. As far as trading back with a really bad team, that's a tough call. And the reason that's a tough call, because really bad teams realize that they're really bad teams, and they know that they're going to be in position to get a really good quarterback next year, right? Because they know that they're still going to stink. So most of those really bad teams aren't going to be ready to trade and give themselves an opportunity to not get that quarterback that they want, because they're going to look at the draft like everyone else is and say, yeah, the quarterbacks are there, but are they as great as the ones next year? Not really. But it's funny because we say that almost every year. Oh, this isn't the year for the quarterback, but next year is, right? And then it's not. And then sometimes when we say, oh, this is the year for the quarterback, when it's all said and done, it's like, yeah, that really wasn't, right? So, I mean, do we really know? No. So that's another reason why in the mock draft on Fitz and Harry, I decided to roll with Anthony Richardson, because you just don't know. Might as well take a shot and see if you can get the guy, right? So, Nick, thanks so much for the call. I do appreciate you. Next up, got a text from Southern Indiana Raider. Says, hey, Q, Southern Indiana Raider here. Man, I'm very ready to get on with the draft. As you know, I was torn about whom to pick, but I'm not any longer. After the letter put out by Richardson, I very much want the selection to be him. The measurable talent and athleticism is off the charts. When you combine that with the fire burner in his belly, I'm sold. He could, and I believe will prove to be an elite quarterback. The Raiders have 11 additional picks to improve their defense. I hope they go get this kid. Keep up the great work that you do. That is Southern Indiana Raider, and he just echoes everything I said in segment number 2. I appreciate your text, my man, but yeah, he just echoed everything I just said in segment number 2 and the exact reason why I picked him in the mock draft on Fitz and Harry on ESPN. So, again, I don't know if it's going to shake out like that and he's going to be available in the real draft April 27th at pick number 7. But if you can get him without trading up, how ideal would that be? Without giving up anything extra, just that's only one pick you're giving up, and you still have 11 more to improve the defense. Yeah, I'm rolling with that. I don't even really know why that became such a hard decision for me. After I really broke it down, I thought, yeah, this makes all the sense in the world. So Southern Indiana Raider, I'm with you. And again, I thought that piece on the Players Tribune was fantastic, so I'm glad that you appreciated that as well. Up next, got a call from Jacob in Fresno. He's calling out the 559 and talk about the draft strategy that I talked about on Tuesday's show, and he took some time to think about it, and well, he wants to chime in on it. Here he is, Jacob in Fresno.
Hey, Q, Jacob in Fresno, listening to this morning's podcast, and thought about what you were saying about building the team, like really building the team through the draft. And I sat there and thought to myself, if we're going to do that process, then I think that with all the 12 draft picks that we have, I don't think we're going to find, like, really good quality, either starters, might even depth players in the later rounds, you know, get 6th or 7th. But we take those really, really later round draft picks and try and trade up as much as possible to get back into the 3rd and 4th rounds. And also, it's probably going to be something that might not be liked, but if there's a team that's really, really, really desperate for QB and wants to trade up to 7, like maybe like a Washington or somebody else, I wouldn't mind trading back to their spot to try and pick up, you know, their 1st round and possibly another 2nd or 3rd, just to really get some quality starters on our defense or on our offensive line. I just think that I agree with you. We just really have to build and see where we go from there. Have a good one, Q.
Jacob, thanks for the call. Appreciate you, my man. It's good to hear from you. Trying to trade up with later round picks like 6 or 7. That is tough because, well, everyone wants to pick in the 3rd and 4th round, right? So it's tough to just package a bunch of your later round picks and just move up like that. I mean, you can do it, or what you could do is like in the 5th round or 4th round, if you want to move up a little bit further and try to target somebody, you can. You know, again, I've said it multiple times. I don't think that they need 12 picks. I don't believe that they're going to pick 12 times. I'm really looking at around 8. I think that that's realistic. So if they package a couple picks to move up a little bit and target certain specific players, I can see that. But I don't think that they'll be able to just package all their later round picks. Even Dave Ziegler told me at the owners meetings in Phoenix, Arizona, he said, I wish that a lot of our picks were in round 3, you know, more 2 or 3 and 4 as opposed to 5, 6, and 7. But you can't pick where all your picks are at, right? I mean, still having 12 shots at it is good. And like you said, you can still package some stuff and move around and be a little bit picky when it comes to certain players. So thank you so much, Jacob, for that call. I do appreciate you. Next up, and just got a couple more, got a text from Jolly Roger J. Q, wanted to circle back to the receivers and see if you had any insight on how the offense might be planning to use the combination of Adams, Myers, and Renfro in the coming season. Assuming Renfro isn't being shot by the front office for a trade, those 3 guys together on the field sound like a problem for a secondary if McDaniels can create good mismatch situations. So I wanted to see what's being said out there, if anything. Jolly Roger J out. And thanks for the text. I do appreciate you. And yeah, that's the thing about it. Versatility is something that we've talked about quite a bit, right? Well, Devontae Adams can line up anywhere on the field. I mean, he's an outside wide receiver, but he can also line up in the slot. Jacoby Myers is an outside wide receiver, but he could also line up in the slot. Hunter Renfro can line up in the slot. So there's so many different options that are there that you look at and you say, oh, okay, hold on. I see how this is starting to come together. So really these guys could be interchangeable. That's the beautiful thing about this. This can be one of them interchangeable offenses where these guys are all over the place and, you know, setting up mismatch nightmares like you're talking about. I don't know, like you said, if Hunter Renfro is being shopped or not. Right. I mean, we'll find out on the draft day if he's going to get moved. I think he would get moved probably on day 1. But that's just me spitballing. You know, and the other thing is they also have DeAndre Carter, who they picked up from the Chargers, who's a really good return specialist who will probably play the Mac Hollins role. So that's another guy coming off a career year as far as receptions go. So you remember, you can throw him in the mix as well. Now all of a sudden you got a pretty salty 4 wide receivers if you throw them out there on the field, and whoever they're going to address with the tight end position. Like, the offense really has a potential to be nasty. The thing about it is the defense has got to be improved. If the defense isn't worth the salt and it's not improved, then it's going to be a problem. But as far as I'm concerned, as long as the offense is out there and the defense is improved a little bit, this team could be good. One of the biggest keys will be Jimmy G staying healthy, and that's always a crapshoot. You just don't know if he's going to be healthy. I root for the guy, right? I'm not going to go against him. I saw somebody make a comment about, Q roots for whoever they pay him to root for, and I don't know who they is. But I want guys to succeed. I root for the Raiders, and I want the Raiders to win. So, yeah, if they're wearing a Raider jersey, yeah, I'm going to root for them. I'm always going to root for the Raiders. I want them to win. So whoever is the trigger man, absolutely right. But nobody's paying me for my opinion. Nobody's paying me to root for anyone. That's just silly. But, there's always somebody, right? That's always got something to say. So, I guess it is what it is. So there's that. But yeah, I hope Jimmy G stays healthy, because that's going to be the key to the Raiders' success if they're going to be successful this upcoming year. And I think it's a big year. I think Josh McDaniels has a lot to prove. I think Dave Ziegler, this draft, he's got a lot to prove. And Patrick Graham, I think this is big for him as well, as long as he gets some defensive help on his side of the ball. So we'll see what happens. All right, final call. Omar from El Paso. He's calling to talk about the draft and what he's thinking about the Raiders, what they should do, and has a few ideas and a few players that he's focused in on. Here's Omar from El Paso.
Hey, Q. This is Omar from El Paso. Hope you guys are all doing well, Raider Nation. Just wanted to put in my 2 cents here. Personally, I think if we stick to 7, if Stroud, Carter, Witherspoon, or Gonzalez are gone, I really wouldn't mind trading back to the late teens. Grab another, second-round pick. And with that first-round pick, I'd get Breesy, Clancy, or even Emmanuel Forbes. I just feel like that defensive tackle position's not that deep this year. Maybe even Saika Ika from Baylor in the 3rd round. That might be pretty good. My hidden gems for the later rounds would be the edge rushers from San Diego State and Eastern Michigan. They both put up monster sack numbers last year and have some motors on them, kind of like Max did when he was over there. Finally, even there's a guy named Devonshel Maxwell, I think, from Chattanooga. He's a defensive tackle. He's pretty solid, too. I think he'd be a nice pickup in the later rounds as well. But, man, I'll tell you what, Q. All I want for Christmas, though, is Drew Sanders in the 2nd round. I think that guy out of Arkansas is just a monster. He's got freakish size, speed, smarts. He's just the real deal. He can cover. He can stuff the linebacker. He can stuff the runner, get after the quarterback. Those are all 3 things that we desperately need. I don't know if you could tell me if he was even a top 30 visit, because I haven't been able to hear anything as far as him coming to town. And I doubt we even use all those 12 picks. I think we're just going to use a lot to move up and move down, or move up, I should say. And I'm okay with that. I also wouldn't be surprised if Renfro isn't traded away either, especially at that number 3 spot if Stroud is still available. But yeah, if you can let us know if Drew Sanders came in town, that'd be great. I do like Clayton Tune from Houston. I think he's got a good arm and some great numbers from last year. And yeah, let me know what you think about Drew Sanders, Q. Thanks for being in the trenches, and stay safe, Raider Nation.
Thank you for the call, my man. I appreciate you. And you threw out a lot of names there, right? Some real quality names. And then you threw in a couple sleepers, some little hidden gems, and I'm okay with that. But Sanders out of Arkansas, that's one that really stood out to you. I'm not sure about his top 30 visits, if he's visited with the Raiders yet or not. I'll find out for you. But he is a player. He's a guy that was originally at Alabama, and he transferred, went to Arkansas, and really he balled out. Sanders would be a really good player. I'll ask Todd McShay about Sanders later today on our conference call that we're going to have early this morning, and might be over already depending on what time you're listening to this. But Sanders is a guy that really intrigues me as well. If he falls to the 2nd round, I can see the Raiders making a move for him. All right, I think that they're going to go very defensive heavy with however many picks that they make right now. They have 12 cracks at it. Like I've said multiple times, don't think that they're going to use all of those. But Sanders would be a player to definitely pay attention to. So, Omar, thanks so much for that call. I do appreciate you, and thanks to everybody for their calls, even the ones that I wasn't able to get on today's show. I'll try to get as many as possible on tomorrow's show. You'll hear from Todd McShay on the conference call that we have a little bit later on. It'll be his 2nd pre-draft conference call, so he'll be done until the draft is, here on April 27th, which which is next week in Kansas City. I'll be there, have an opportunity to talk to all the prospects. They've already sent out the schedule. There's also NFL Network guys and ESPN guys that we'll be able to talk to while we're in Kansas City as well. So I got a lot coming to you before the draft, during the draft, and after the draft here on the Locked On Raiders podcast. Very excited about that, excited about the show each and every day. So thank you so much, Raider Nation, for making the show your first listen each and every day. Thanks for checking us out on YouTube. Thanks to my man Ari, who's doing a fantastic job. And yeah, we'll be back tomorrow doing it just like we do on the regular. So until then, Raider Nation, take care of yourself, take care of your family, love on your family. Most importantly, as always, just win, baby.